Well, good morning, good evening, good night, all you sports fans. We hope
Woo.
this podcast or video, however you are um, interacting with this discussion we're going to have, finds you just doing something awesome. Just I don't know, like during this pandemic, I've had to write a lot of emails, and I was sick and tired of writing. I hope this email finds you well because it just sounded redundant after a while. So eventually, I started being like, I hope this email finds you riding the back of an orca going down beside the shoreline as the mighty moose bow their antlers towards you, and beavers have carved statues of your glory on the coast, and Canada geese fly over top of you. And so I hope this email finds you something like that on top of a mountain, or paddleboarding, or riding an orca, or I don't know, sitting at home watching it, or at work when you should be working. Maybe you're cleaning, you just got the earbuds in, and you're just, I want to listen to someone who doesn't know a lot talk about Samson. And let me tell you, we have come to fill that void for you. I'm joined this week, as always, with my lovely co host, Tim Miller. Tim is a priest in the Anglican Church over in our motherland, England.
Yeah.
Um, and he is overseeing two churches, correct? I don't know what the term is. I
That's
know you
one.
said it. Curator for two? Is that what it is?
Priest in charge.
Priest in
Priest in
charge. Priest in charge of our lives and our days. Charles in charge. And I am Derek Wilson. I am the church coordinator slash a bunch of other stuff for St. Andrew's in Duncan Presbyterian Church, Duncan, BC, out here on the west coast on the island.
West
And
West.
represent. I am the farthest thing from gangster um, you will ever meet. Sometimes, yeah. Anyway, we are glad that you're joining us. We are going to continue our talk on Samson and finish up the chapter. And then next week, we'll just do a big wrap up of our whole talk on Samson. And then after that, we're going to start something new, something different. And we want you to stay tuned for that because it is going to be adequate. And that is. Everyone's all pumped up. Yeah, it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be adequate.
Yeah.
It'll be
It's going to
worthy
be
of
a
a wait.
soft pass. Yeah.
It's gonna be soft. It's not like your best friend. It's not like a really close friend. It's more like an
Yeah.
acquaintance. That's
Yeah.
kind of like I'm all right with talking with you. I'm okay with dropping some off, picking some up, but we're not gonna have deep con. I don't know where that was going. I have no idea what I was talking about there. Don't listen to me.
We're going to
Um,
Samson. Let's go
I'm
to
just
Samson.
excited. I'm just excited to be back. I'm back at work. I'm off my holidays, so I can actually
Yeah.
talk louder now and not just really quiet because I was right next to my neighbor's wall and I didn't want to wake him up early in the morning. So now I can talk. I can be rambunctious. I can dance if I want to. I can leave my friends behind. So Tim,
Yes.
shall we get into this?
I think there's literally no other place we could go right now but text.
You told me to do the introduction, and this is your own fault.
And I did tell you I was going to buckle up and be ready for whatever came.
Yes, and it came. Uh, yeah, so what we like to do is we will, if this is your first time joining us, we'll read through a passage, do a pause where we can reflect and think about that passage. Then we're going to read it again, do another little pause and reflect. And this is just an opportunity, like if something jumps out to you or something um, kind of speaks to you, just take a moment and think on that. And so like we're so used to just reading the Bible really quick and like let's just read it and then get into the thing. We want to give the Bible and our passage the appropriate time to actually think about it. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna say what speaks jumps out to us, a word or a phrase, and then we're going to have some questions about that, and that is usually when I go off the rails and we start the 20-minute timer and we start talking about the passage. So
Or
Tim, would you
something
like to what?
vaguely related to it. I said, or
That,
something
yeah,
vaguely related to it. Yeah.
yeah, like yeah,
Excellent.
yeah, and we almost guaranteeing this conversation will may start in Samson, but it's gonna end who knows where. So bring a
With
compass
Jesus.
because we're going to
With
be all
Jesus.
over the map.
Yeah.
And here we go. Tim, would you like to read
Excellent.
first?
I'd love to. Um, So, reading from Judges 14, verses 10 to 20. So his father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, uh, for so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Put your riddle that we may hear it." And he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." And in 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the fourth day they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father nor my mother, and shall I tell you?" She wept before him 7 days their feast lasted, and on the seventh day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" And he said to them, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town and took their spoil and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house. And Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man.
His father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, "Put your riddle that we may hear it." And he said to them, "Out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet." And in the 3 days they could not solve the riddle. On the fourth day they said to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me, you do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." And he said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father nor my mother, and shall I tell you?" She wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted. And on the seventh day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city came to him on the seventh day before the sun went down. "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" And he said to them, If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would have not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and struck down 30 men of the town, and took their spoil, and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In his hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. Well, Tim, is there any is there anything that stands out to you in this verse? Any word or phrase? Any questions
Yeah,
you might have?
what stands out to me is that, that sense of where we commit ourselves to not necessarily rush to the common passages, but to sit for a bit longer in some of the more obscure ones. Leaves us in moments like this. Um, I think the whole thing, I'm so fascinated with this story because what I'm so unclear about in my mind is like what was the what were the writers of those who were like writing and recording the book of Judges, what was the point in holding on to this story of Samson's life, because it doesn't seem to fit any of the stuff we've heard so far about like his calling to be like a judge against the Philistines, and like and like there's nothing about him being a Nazarite here. Very different from the story we kind of catch at the end. um so like, and as far as like words and phrases that are jumping out to me right now, there's so many different ones, but I like the one that like is very kind of jumped out at me every single time we read this is where he says, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle. um,
Yep.
and there's something about the infantile response of Samson, which reminds me of a lot of masculine responses in the world right now. But um, I,
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah. So that I did what I try not to do, which is I threw in a bunch of questions, a bunch of comments, and maybe a word or two. So what have you got, Derek? So we can start the timer.
Well, I love how Samson brought this on himself. Like he's there for a feast, it's his wedding, and he's like, "Hey, I've got a riddle for you guys." And then he's the price of the riddle is quite high. Like 30 linen garments, I assume, seem quite expensive because when they talk to his wife, they're like, "You're gonna put us in the poorhouse or impoverish us." Um, and so he did this to himself, but he almost did it. Like he not only did he put himself in the old in this position himself, but then sorry, this may be my question part, but he put this in this position himself, almost won, but then also put him in the position to fail when he told his wife, knowing that she was gonna tell like her family, right? Like she's pestering him for 7 days about this, and you don't love me, you hate me, why haven't you told me, all this kind of stuff. And so on the seventh day, he gave in, and he could have waited another day and told him, be like, see, this is what it is. But
Mm,
he's always putting himself in these situations,
mm, mm.
which I find quite funny. Like even with the lion, like he's traveling by himself and the lion comes and he rips it or whatever. So that's it. And then you get like his choice of women, like I think we all know Samson and Delilah, like his choice of women is questionable at best. Um, not a not a Proverbs 38 or whatever it is type of woman. Proverbs, what is it? 27 Proverbs, whatever it
Proverbs
is.
31. Proverbs
Proverbs
31.
31.
Yeah,
Not that type
yeah.
of woman. So yeah, it's just kind of funny. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's hit the
who's gonna
clock.
guess a honeycomb out of a lion anyway? Like how is that even like is that normal back then? Like was there like just like I know they do honeycombs wherever, but I
Yeah.
would think there's other better spots than the carcass of a lion where other animals are gonna come and eat it. Oh, can I have one of those maple cookies?
Let let's pause for a second.
Okay.
Sorry.
So yeah, I don't know, like it's
Yeah.
didn't know
But so
how.
let's start with where you've started us. I think, which I think is a really important thing, is like there's a real clarity in Samson's life about cause and effect,
Mm,
and about also too this strange. There's this overarching piece of Samson's story, which is which is the kind of calling of God and his role as a judge in Israel, which is running parallel to this often what feels like a very insecure, immature young man who's navigating the world and wants the world to, I think in many ways, maybe see in him what he's maybe been told by his parents his whole life, that he is like this great person who's going to save his people, and free them from from the Philistine rule or something like that. And there's this real sense in Samson's stories where you see cause and effect, you see action and reaction, you see somebody who there's very, especially in this story, there's a real sense of like he's done this, and so these are the consequences of that action. And then there's also here's Samson who's unwilling to accept those consequences for himself, and again we have the spirit of the Lord rushing in upon him before he goes and beats up some people and takes their clothes. Um, so
yeah, and he like what his calling, like the wording of it was he's gonna release them from um the power of the Philistines, right? It was something quite like that, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
what's the actual because he never did that, right? Like he killed a bunch of Philistines, but he never lifted them from the Philistine rule. So his calling was
Yeah,
incompleted. And so
yeah,
even when we're looking at Samson, like he never does anything you think a judge would do. And yet
Mhm.
we would say, oh, he still fulfilled his calling, but he didn't. Like he was called, he never really did. So he
Yeah.
missed the mark on not only all his choices, but also his final calling. And we
Mm.
can look at Samson and be like, oh, he was so strong. Look at all this that he got deceived by women just like Adam. It's our fault. But no, like he did these
Yeah.
choices and he picked wrong like almost every time.
Mm. Mm.
Other than like,
Yeah.
maybe the donkey bone or the lifting the gates. I'd have to go read those stories again. But like he's making all these wrong choices and it ends up he's missed what was
Mm.
prophesied over his
Yeah, yeah,
earth.
yeah. So
And
yeah,
so
so
this isn't something that like Samson isn't something that we should like follow and be like, oh, I dressed up like Samson for Halloween or the church play. Like we should be like Samson and follow God's will. Like the
yeah,
story is this man who has this great calling and
yeah.
he's missing it at every opportunity. And the only
Mm.
times he really does what he's supposed to do is when the spirit has to actually overtake him and go do
So,
what
but
he
like that,
wants
so
to do.
that's another question, I think, isn't it? Is like, so you've got these. this thing going on, as you say, where like the spirit comes as if to try to like course correct something of what he's missed doing or what he should have been doing. But there's also the sense like he tends to use that kind of empowerment and gift of the spirit to um, to I guess to almost in a sense to justify himself, right? Like in this
Yeah.
situation, he doesn't use it then as the spirit doesn't come upon him, and then he like sees this sense of, you spent too much time aligning yourself with the Philistines and not looking for how you can actually free the people of Israel from them and their rule. Spent too much time, trying to be comfortable getting the woman you wanted and whatever. He takes the kind of the power of the spirit and then uses it so that he doesn't have to go and find 30 pieces of clothes, and 30 changes of clothes,
Yeah.
for them. And there's this, and the same thing as you say, like with the, he's out walking by himself with the lion, and the lion attacks him, and the spirit comes, and instead of him having been kind of sensible and traveled with his family, and he was throwing a bit of a strop, went off by himself, the spirit of God comes upon him, and then he uses that as like this opportunity to once again validate that God is with him and he's the strong guy.
Yeah.
um, and I think, like, for me, that's something has become problematic with the reading of Samson. As you say, he's not really somebody who we like put up in front of people and say, read, study, and then follow and
Go
reenact
and do
the
likewise.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, like become more like Samson.
Yeah.
um and but at the same time too, when you think about how we teach Samson and the life of Samson, you know the character in Samson's life who we see as being kind of the one who was evil or was doing wrong was Delilah, who tricked him.
Yeah.
And we'd say to children, it's like, be like Samson,
Yeah.
be that
Samson's the
strange
innocent
person.
one here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. But he's not.
Yeah,
Yeah. Do you want to pause?
yeah. 1 second.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, maybe we shouldn't be like Samson, like he's not the innocent victim that maybe we've grown to believe with our children's church stories and stuff. At the same time, I'm thinking like he's making all these wrong decisions. He's doing all these things that are wrong, and yet God is still working through him and doing things. And so what are the people in my life that I am not seeing God working through or seeing what God is calling them to do because I see all the mistakes that they are making or all the wrong choices that they are making. Um, like
Mm.
if we had Samson in the church today and you were like, well, it'd be different because if he went and killed 30 people, you'd be like, well, that's not right. But
Well, he didn't kill them. He just beat them up there and stole
you
their
just beat him
clothes.
up. Fair enough.
Give the
But like, okay, so beat up 30 people to pay off a debt or um, ripping apart wildlife or,
yeah.
marriage and then it didn't work out and that kind of stuff. Like what are the people in my own life that I'm looking at from a distance going like, well, look at all the decisions they're making and the path they're going down. They're messing up huge. I don't even want to be a part of that. I don't even want to be with that. And like this brings me to the point that you were talking about yesterday. Like Samson's doing it all himself, but what if he had more people with him? Like how much more could he have done? And so maybe the reason he's making all these terrible decisions and doing all these things is he doesn't have someone
Yeah.
going with him, being like, "Hey, like you have this calling on you. You've got this. You're doing this. You need to
Mm.
smarten up. Like you need to start doing some better things." And
Yeah.
so maybe the people I've come across that are Samsung esque,
Mm.
that have a huge calling, and I can tell that they have, like, they're, meant for great things, or whatever that means.
Hmm.
But I've
Yeah.
kind of dismissed them, and I'm like, okay, well, you're making terrible choices. Once you get on the right track, then I will come alongside you. Or
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
they need someone to come alongside them now to help them get
Hmm.
on that track, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the
Yeah.
I'm willing to join you for the last leg of the race when you're about to win, but I don't want to do all the training with you to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get you
Yeah.
there, right?
And I
So
think it goes back to that thing where you were saying, which again, it can be problematic the way we frame it. But what we have in Samson's story is we have this promise and prophecy over his life, which was given to his mom, which was then shared with his dad. And well, we don't know how much further that kind of prophecy was told. But it was this idea that he would be somebody who is, he's help was to deliver Israel from the Philistines, or I think it was begin saving them was the word that the English Standard Version uses. And it was this, and as you say, it was a sense of like the calling that he had. And what you kind of miss out on, as you say, which I think is really important to remember, is that like what the calling was to be a participant in the deliverance of Israel from the Philistines.
okay,
And
gotcha.
what we never get in his story is, does that ever get accomplished? Does that ever, even begin to come to fruition or not? And I think one of the things that it did remind me of as you were talking as well, which I just throw in as another layer, is I think you're absolutely right about that sense where we often we can look at somebody else's life, and when we can see those kind of moral judgments of, well, that's right, this is wrong, you're definitely not choosing things that I think are right, so I'm not going to align myself with you until you kind of make that turn. But then there's that other layer where, whether we see that or not, if we can see the same enemy that other person is going up against, there's a lot of things we automatically put blinders to in their life and their character and their choices, because we're fighting against the same person. And there's a sense like where I can imagine at the time at people looking at Samson, and he doesn't strike me as somebody who had a lot of friends, not just like the stories are absent of people around him, but he just doesn't strike me as somebody who had like personality to be able to carry off, long-term friendships. And so there's something about the way that when he was kind of constantly showing up as like the enemy is the Philistines and I'm working against them, you can imagine that a lot of the house of Israel were just like, yeah, he's not the person we would have chosen. We wouldn't
Yeah.
put his face on our flag, but he's still fighting the right people. So we're just going to kind of turn a blind eye, maybe even give him some support if he asks for it, because he seems to be doing things that God's calling him to do, and he's working towards a goal that we all think is very important. But he's and so there's that other place too, where I think kind of there's the space where we actively avoid being with somebody because
Yeah.
we see their choices as being right or wrong and we don't align ourselves with them. And then there's the other part where we actively avoid that engagement with right and wrong, and once again separate ourselves from them, but kind of give them permission and space to get on with what they're doing because we think that they're fighting the right cause. And I think what's missing on both of those really is that sense, as you were saying, about are we willing to say whether it's right or wrong? We're actually trying to work together for something, like
Yeah.
participation in this to the end goal, together in fellowship and community, to because also recognizing that there'll be something in our own lives that needs to be called out, and if there's nobody around us to call it out, we could just kind of walk our way through life all of a sudden thinking, oh, actually, you know what, it's not as bad as what I thought, because I still had the strength to steal those 30 pieces of clothing, or to
Yeah.
tear the mouth off the lion, or whatever it
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah. The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
I that seems like the right spot to end is just the what are we like we're so even when you're talking about what are they against and stuff and are we against the same thing. I would add that what are they for and are we for the same thing, where
Mm,
I would tend to more focus on what this group or this person or whatever is for, and is that something I want to align with, because
yeah.
there's so much things about fear and that um, that I don't want to add to that. I want to add to hope and joy and peace and what are these people, and maybe
Mhm.
yeah, like this whole study of the Bible is like even with Abraham and all the other ones, you're just like this is they're making mistakes. Like they're not perfect people. They're doing these terrible things. Or not terrible things, but making terrible choices. And yet God is still using them. And even though we can make mistakes or choices that maybe aren't the best, there's at no point has it gone too far where
Mm,
there can't be some kind of redemption or some kind of turning
mhm,
point.
mm.
I don't care who you
Yeah,
are. Um,
yeah. And
so
there's a strange thing that actually, we hit a point in kind of um, kind of Christian values and Christian emphasis that really that doesn't do any justice or leave much room oftentimes for discipleship. Discipleship in the sense of, as you say, that kind of ability to find grace, mercy, redemption, and new opportunities, or that space also to be refined. And before we recorded, Derek was sharing a little story about somebody who was watching on YouTube about kind of predictions of the rapture, and we're so obsessed with this, with believing that so many things have to be absolutely right before Jesus comes back, so that we end up in either that so we can end up in heaven and not hell, that we miss the whole kind of message of what that kind of calling to a life of discipleship is, to share hope and joy and love in a meaningful, reality transforming way that isn't about making a yes no choice in the moment, but is about reorienting and constantly being reoriented in our very lives towards the very things of God in the world, which is about redemption and recreation of the whole cosmos, right? Like,
yeah,
it's not just for me to get to heaven or not. It is about the redemption of all things.
yeah, yeah. And actually, in that video, he talked about how lots of Christians think that they're saved, but they're not because they're missing this one or two step in their conversion story. And I was like, no, like that. You're getting very specific here. Like God's got a checklist, and if you don't hit every one of these, then you're out.
Yeah.
Going to hell. Sorry, you
Mm.
should have prayed for 3 minutes, but you only did 2.5.
My
Out of my
clock was
hands.
running fast. It's not my fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What time zone are you on? Um.
But
So yeah,
maybe that's part of it then too. Like that, the encouragement of the story of Samson is actually that the faithfulness of God to both find in our own lives a place of redemption, reorientation, and life, um, is actually something that even supersedes and transcends our own stupidity and own humanity, even in the moments where we may be trying to do good, right?
yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I would say, I think I've said this before, but like for me, one of the greatest things I've kind of come to later on in my life is recognizing that the hope and grace that I feel resonates through scripture and through my experiences of God and my understanding of like, worship and fellowship and ministry of the church is actually big enough to encompass the whole of the things I've done in my life to this point and the whole of the things I will do after. And if God can find enough grace for somebody else that I meet randomly on the street, then my hope and my trust and my faith is now that God can actually find that same grace for me. And that's got to be good news. It's good news for me, I just like maybe I just but I feel very encouraged in the good news in a way, and the grace, because if I can recognize it for somebody else, then maybe at one point I could recognize it and accept it for myself.
Mm. Yeah, and I find, well, even with myself, like I find I have more grace for other people than I do myself, and so I'm working on now, kind of having that for myself, where other people can mess up and do whatever, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine, no problem. But me, yeah, but yeah, like the gospel's good news, right? Like it's like when we put all these checklists and all these, I don't want to say restrictions, but almost borders on it, um, and all these things that we have invented for it, all these things that we have put on it, and then all of a sudden, slowly it turns into not good news, where it's just become a Christian, so you can't do this, this, or this.
Mm.
And it's like, no, it's a lot more life giving than that. It's a lot more. The gospel is life giving. The gospel is
Mm.
hope for the
Mm.
hopeless, and
Mm.
peace for the people that are upset and angry, and richness to the poor, and
Mm.
freedom to the captives. It's all these things. It's not constricting, shall we say,
Yeah.
for lack of better
It
words. I
may
don't know
be,
what.
yeah,
I'll choke the life out of you with the gospel.
yeah. Just like Samson, yeah, yeah.
What was that
But
movie we watched in Bible school where it was like, or like the Christian school or something like that? And I think it had like Mandy Moore or something, but she threw the
oh,
Bible at the kid, and she's like,
yeah, yeah.
"I am full of the love of Christ." Like,
Oh, what was that one called?
I can't
I
remember
was
either, but it
thinking
was
about
like,
that the
I
other
think
day.
Macaulay Culkin was like a gay kid in it or something,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and one
So
of them got
somebody's like
pregnant.
yelling on the other side of the screen because they know exactly what it's called. But I think
Yeah,
like we've hit time and everything like that. But I think for me that sense actually of maybe that's part of the tragedy of Samson's story is that he was never able to experience or recognize how his calling was meant to be good news for him or for his people. um, and
yeah,
and so we have the layer of him not having kind of community and connections, and then we also have that layer of him not recognizing that this was meant to be a sign of life and hope, not just a weapon in battle. And I think that's the thing we see as strength, and we start to look at it just as that sense of kind of for or against a weapon in battle, and not
what?
recognizing the person in it.
Yeah, which I would say is what they were expecting out of Jesus too, right? Like the Messiah was supposed to come and
Yeah,
liberate them through the sword, and
yeah,
Samson is all that muscle,
yeah.
but he doesn't have the moral compass to do it. Whereas Jesus,
Mhm.
is Jesus.
Yeah.
He does it a different
Mhm.
way, and
Mm.
a better way. That movie's called Saved, by the way. I looked it
Oh,
up.
there you go. Saved.
Saved.
Excellent. Sorry, do you want to
Yeah.
say anything to people as we sign off? No?
No.
Are you hungry?
You
Yeah.
want to tell us the story about dragons and unicorns?
Dragons, unicorns, strong men,
No.
hungry children. You want to tell a
Hungry,
story
hungry
about hungry
hippos.
children? No? Oh, well. Excellent.
Okay.
Well, next week we'll revisit these three passages of Samson, and we yeah, if there's anything in there, particularly over the last 3 weeks, where you think to yourselves, you guys are missing something, it's right there in front of you. Send it in. We want to
Just like
talk
me
about it.
watching that video of the guy, like, you're missing the big point.
Yeah, yeah.
If we're
Right,
missing the
right.
big point.
Yeah, yeah.
Let
There
us
are
know.
2 steps in our conversion we have completely missed out on, and I
Yeah.
don't want to miss out on being saved.
A cross-shaped bridge. Cross-shaped bridge. I've got a bracelet with 5 different colors on it. Yeah. So let me know. Let us know.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, bless you guys, and
Blessings.
we'll see you again next week.
Yes. See y'all. Toodles.
Peace.